So in this video, we're going to talk about different poetic devices, so literary devices having to do with poetry. And some of these are also used in prose, so you might already be familiar with them. But with poetry, we're looking to say so much in so few words. So we want things to be concise, we want them to be poignant, we want to really focus in on how we can get to the overall meaning with less words, which is really why metaphors and similes exist, is so that we can compare something to something we already know about. So if you think that it's going to take you pages and pages and pages to try to describe what love is, then you could instead use a metaphor or a simile to help people take the background knowledge that they already have of something they already understand and then have it be that. So love is like a warm blanket. Okay, so you can then have that connection so they know what that is and then they can tie it in. So some of the literary devices that we're going to be focusing on are metaphor, simile, and symbol. So metaphors, again, are a comparison that's a direct comparison. Love is a rose. So you're saying this abstract thing is this concrete thing. Okay, they're one and the same. A simile is when we're just comparing them, so we're saying it's like that, but it isn't 100% that. So you could say life is like a winding river. Okay, so life is a journey. It's going to have lots of twists and turns, things like that, which is actually another metaphor. Life is a journey, but life is like this river and it's moving from place to place. And so again, we have that idea, we can visualize that, we can picture that life is doing this, okay? And then symbol is any kind of object that represents another thing. So famous symbols often come from Greek and Roman mythology or Christianity because we as a culture know about those things. Obviously in other cultures there are other symbols that they are familiar with as well. But a good example of this would be an apple. So the Twilight books, when they first came out, there's an apple on the front of it, and so the apple, you immediately think of temptation or seduction in some way, because apples tie back to the story of Adam and Eve and the fruit that God tells them not to eat, and then they eat it and bring sin into the world. And so we are only looking at the cover of a book, and we already know that this book is going to be about temptation and having to make decisions between right and wrong. Okay? And that's just the cover of said book. So poems do that as well, where we just have a symbol for something, and then we can connect back to it and have all that background information. The other thing that we do this with is allusions, which we've talked about before. So allusions are any kind of reference to something outside of the text. So they can be old allusions, like I said, to Greek and Roman mythology, Christianity, things like that, but they also can be pop culture allusions. So any kind of name dropping that's happening in there, we put people's names. We obviously have associations with them. We put different things like fairy tales or superheroes, things like that. Again, we have an idea of what that is. In Hamilton, we saw this with comparing Lafayette to Lancelot, and so we have Lancelot from King Arthur's Knights, and so we already know what kind of character Lafayette's going to be, because Lancelot is not afraid for his own safety. He's going to put the betterment of his kingdom, so his king and the queen, and this idea of chivalry and protecting those people, to go out and ride for their honor, for their freedom, for all of those things. And so we have that background because of knowing who Lancelot is, and then we can put that into who Lafayette is. So we're going to see a lot of allusions in poetry because it makes it so we don't have to explain things, because you already know about that. Another literary device that we're going to see a lot is another one that we've talked about, which is this alliteration. So the same repetition of the beginning sound. Okay, so alliteration, again, not to be confused with rhyming, which is the same end sound. We're going to see both of these things. Alliteration, same beginning sound, like a tongue twister. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. And then we have our rhyming, where the ends of the lines rhyme, and they fit together that way. And we'll have different types of rhyming. So one example that we see a lot when we look at Shakespeare is we're going to see these sight rhymes and these slant rhymes where you want to make them rhyme, but they don't actually rhyme. So a good example of this is love and move for sight rhyme. So the ends of those words look the same, so they rhyme, right? Well, they don't, but it's a sight rhyme. So they look like they rhyme, so we can go love and move. Okay, those sort of rhyme. They're sight rhymes. And then we have slant rhymes where they sound very similar, but they're not actually rhyming. So worm and swarm. Okay, so worm has the O there, swarm has the A, but they have that similar sound. And the W is playing a big role in having those kind of sound the same. But this is where I see a lot in Shakespeare of you're reading something and then students will be like, oh, is it supposed to be this so that it rhymes with this? And it's like, no, like that just is a sight rhyme or that just is a slant rhyme. It doesn't actually rhyme. And that's why Shakespeare made up so many words. So yes, we have metaphors, similes, symbols, alliteration, rhyming. The other thing that we're going to see a lot of is personification, because people best understand things through terms that we understand. And so to look at the world through the lens of being a human and attributing human qualities to the world helps us to better understand those things. So we see a lot of personification in poems. And then the other device I want to talk about is onomatopoeia. So those are the sound words, the cuckoo and sizzle, zip, zap, zop. All of those ideas where we're quite literally writing out what we hear, and we're putting that out phonetically. So obviously there are all sorts of literary devices we could be looking at, but those are the major ones. The other thing that's not a literary device but a syntactical thing is we have kind of 3 different ways we can do poems as far as the writing of them. So we have enjambment, where everything's jammed together, meaning there's no end punctuation for a long time. So the lines just go, they don't have a period or a comma at the end. They just keep going, everything's connected. It's like one long run-on sentence, and then we finally come to an end. We have end stops, which you're familiar with for just sentences, which is that we have periods or exclamation points, things like that, at the ends of the different lines. So it's an end stop. So enjambment, everything's jammed together. End stop, things are stopped by punctuation. And then caesura. Caesura is a pause in the very middle or close to the middle of a line. So this is where you have a comma right in the middle of a line, or maybe even a period in the middle of a line. And it's forcing us to pause mid-line and not get all the way to the end. Because when we read poetry, we read until we get to punctuation. Okay, so it doesn't matter how many lines it takes us to do that. We just keep reading until we get to punctuation. So that's your basic overview of poetic devices and then syntactical devices that we'd be using in poetry.